Turkey's defense minister says Russia and Ukraine have made progress in their efforts to get urgently needed grain exports out of Ukraine. He said that talks will continue next week in the hope of a final deal on releasing 20 million tons. Wednesday's discussions in Istanbul ended with a tentative agreement about how to transport the grain across the Black Sea. Stockpiles stuck in Ukraine have caused global prices to rise sharply, making food less affordable.
Alexander Chubuk's warehouse should be empty and ready for the new harvest. Instead, it's full to the rafters with wheat from last year, stuck here because of Russia's war.
Our Ukrainian grain cannot enter the international market now because ports are not working. The sea route was the most important. Because of this, the demand for grain decreased.
But the harvest won't wait. And the grain keeps piling up, even as the farmers run out of space for it. An estimated 22 million tons of grain is stuck in Ukraine. Some of it is stored in silos like these in the port of Odessa, waiting for export. Before the war, 90% of Ukraine's grain was exported via ports on the Black Sea. But helped by territorial gains, Russia is now blockading those ports. And Kyiv has laid mines across the Black Sea to defend its coast. The UN is proposing safe corridors through the sea to get the grain out and avert a global food crisis.
Without opening ports, I don't see that Ukrainian farmers will survive. And it's first, if Ukrainian farmers will not survive, we will not be able to feed African countries.
Known as the breadbasket of the world, Ukraine is a top global exporter of crops like wheat, barley and corn. With the harvest stuck inside Ukraine, key supplies are missing and prices worldwide have shot up. The UN says a solution must be found urgently to avoid starvation on an unprecedented scale.
Well, Nick Spicer is our correspondent in Kyiv, and I asked him how much progress was made at the talks in Turkey to break the grain deadlock and whether a deal really is in sight.
Well, I think, Brent, first and foremost, we have to keep in mind that neither side wants to be seen as causing a global famine. Some 300 million people around the world face hunger, not eating enough to be healthy because of this blockade of Ukrainian grain. So they're participating in these talks, not to be a cynic, I think in part to show the world that they take this famine problem seriously. The steps we're talking about are what you were mentioning, the negotiations about how to actually get the grain out. It can go through Europe, it can go through the Bosphorus. That's why Turkey is a player and is hosting these talks. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, I think who can be trusted as an independent observer, said that a big step was taken forward and another big step should be taken next week. And the Turkish defense minister said that the parties would be gathering again next week. But look, Brent, I think we can only really feel comfortable that a deal has been struck when we see those big ships of grain sailing out of the Ukrainian ports.
And we know that more than 20 million tons of grain are stuck in Ukraine. What about alternative ways of getting the grain out?
Yeah, well, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and Ukraine and its partners are finding ways to get maybe 20% of what they manage to get out in a typical year out of the country, and that includes rail and road into Poland, and now increasingly smaller vessels into Romania. If you look at how the Danube has all kinds of estuaries, there are little estuaries, little rivers that smaller boats can go up. But you need, of course, the port facilities. We're not talking about big ports that can handle those huge ships carrying all kinds of grain. So those are some of the solutions that Ukraine is looking at, and the people who buy Ukrainian grain in desperation, essentially, as we heard in the report earlier, because they need to empty those silos. Otherwise, the harvest that is in the fields now will essentially rot. And so this is a situation that won't last 1 year, but possibly 2.
And we understand attacks have intensified in the south, where much of the grain is stored. Is there no let up in the fighting in sight?
Well, no. I mean, I think we've talked about an operational pause on the Russian side. They managed to take the, Luhansk province more or less completely, having set that as an objective. And so they're regrouping. They've been basically waging an artillery campaign, scorched earth, blowing up cities, leaving just rubble behind, and the Ukrainians evacuating strategically to set up defensive positions elsewhere. What they are doing is sort of punching down south in the bottom of the country around Mykolaiv, using these American HIMARS, very precision rocket systems to take out ammunition depots, to stop those artillery barrages. That's the priority. They basically have a range of 70 kilometers, so the Russians have to move those depots back 100 kilometers away from the front line for them to be safe, which means it takes a long time to get them up to the places where they need to be fired. So it changes the game. But we just have this in from the Pentagon. Russia is to be procuring, well, from Iran, drones, which will allow it to see where those HIMARS systems are located. So the balance could shift again in the future, Brent.
Yeah, that's right. That's news just coming in. Nick Spicer with the latest in Kyiv. Nick, as always, thank you.